What's happening, football fans? Welcome to another episode of the Call Sheet Daily Podcast. I'm your host, Coach Kevin Smith, here at the Fans First Sports Network. Happy to bring this show to you, which talks about the great game of football from various perspectives. I try to incorporate my 30 years or so of coaching experience into the show to fold in some elements that involve scheme, that involve coaching, but we also want to look at the game from a fan's perspective, from a human perspective, and try to incorporate some history in it as well. And that's kind of where I'm going to pick up today. Piggybacking off of yesterday's episode, might be a little scheme nerdy for some of you, or at least a little X and O nerdy. I'm not taking a deep dive on a Whiteboard Wednesday type of thing, but I do want to piggyback on yesterday's conversation about the evolution of the linebacker position to look at how offenses are now countering. How have offenses, now that it's their move on the chessboard, chosen to attack the fact that defenses are getting smaller, later, and faster? Get to that in a second, but I want to tell you about the rest of our week. So tomorrow on the show, on Wednesday, I'm going to have my good friend Wayne Mazzoni, longtime college baseball coach, was the pitching coach at Sacred Heart University in Connecticut for about 15 years, worked in the minor league system, tons of experience as a coach. And Wayne and I are going to get into the psychology of coaching. And our show is going to really be a broad show about the universality, for lack of a better term. I might have made that word up. The universality of being a coach and some of the problems that you have to solve, and how often your role is as much about solving mental problems as it is about physical problems with young athletes. And then Thursday's our State of the Franchise show, and Rob Guerrera from the Stats on Fire podcast, one of the most popular shows here on FFSN, is going to be on to talk about San Francisco. They made a ton of news recently, signing Brock Purdy, and then just yesterday signing Fred Warner to an extension. Friday, of course, is our Hot Route show with my buddy Pez, conversations about football and life. Great guests throughout the rest of the week. But today, I'm piggybacking on yesterday's show, where, if you missed it, we talked about the evolution of the linebacker position in the game of football. Is the linebacker position being devalued? I went through all of the average salaries by position group in the NFL. And what you find is that linebackers are being paid among the worst, or I should say, are being paid the worst among position groups in the NFL. Only tight ends of regular position groups, not counting kickers or punters, only tight ends are being paid less annually on average than linebackers. And it's interesting because as I recorded that show yesterday morning, I ended it by wondering aloud if what we're going to see at the linebacker position is that the elite players, and I named guys like Fred Warner and Matt Milano, those types of players, Roquan Smith, etc. My favorite of the whole bunch, Nick Bolton. I said, are those guys going to separate themselves from the pack? Are we moving in a direction where teams are using a lot of sub package? Because the job of a linebacker has gotten so diverse. It's like a 5-tool outfielder in baseball. It's really hard to find those guys. So are the guys who can do it, the guys like Bolton and Warner, are they going to get paid on like basically a separate scale from your more utilitarian linebackers who can do one or two of those things, but not all of them? And lo and behold, after the show was published yesterday, news broke that the 49ers had extended Fred Warner and made him the highest paid linebacker in the NFL. I found that really interesting. But that prompted a reaction from me where I said, okay, if this is how we're going to do it now on defense, sub packages, putting big safeties, slot corners, or 5-tool linebackers on the field to counter all of the 11 personnel, all of the smaller personnel groupings that offenses have moved to in the last decade. When it comes round for the offense to make their move again, what's the move going to be? And we're already seeing it. So the title of today's show is go big or go home, how offenses are countering the defensive revolution. The offensive, it's amazing how cyclical it is. And I was talking to Chuck Donahue about this last week when he was on the show, and Chuck made a great point. And his point was everything's cyclical and it's a constant chess match, but the offense seems to move first. There seems to be an innovation offensively that prompts a defensive innovation or counter move. And in this instance, it was the spread revolution that overtook first college and high school playbooks back in the early 2000s, really kind of kicked in the late 90s, but really infiltrated high school and college playbooks in the early 2000s, where for the first time, offenses began to ditch either their second tight end or their second back. They were overwhelmingly 21, meaning 2 running backs on the field, personnel, or 12, meaning 2 tight ends on the field. And they started to ditch that stuff. And they began to just go spread, 10 personnel, 1 back, 4 wide receivers, no tight ends, and open the game. Quarterback read options became all the rage. Teams were now playing in more space, bubble screens, perimeter screens, using the width of the field, etc. It's funny, my first year as an offensive coordinator, 2006, we had a first-year head coach. He wanted to be a pro-eye power team. I was on board and said, okay, let's go for it, man. We got into our season early on, and we suffered an injury up front to our best offensive lineman, and then the young man who was playing quarterback for us just really couldn't get it done. And we were a couple games in, and we lost our first games, and we weren't moving the ball offensively. And we went, Chris Armstrong, who may be listening, Chris is a loyal call sheet follower, but Chris and I went to our head coach and basically pitched the idea of going to the spread, which was really a novelty at that time in our area. But I'd been to some clinics and I'd looked at it, and we had a really athletic wide receiver who we thought could at least be able to run the ball as a spread quarterback, and throw a 9 route. We had some good wide receivers on the outside. We had a very good running back. And we thought to ourselves, hey, man, maybe we can spread it out. And we'll throw the ball up to our 6'4" receiver, and otherwise we'll run a lot of zone and zone read and et cetera. And our head coach, to his credit, said, go for it. And I remember going over to Chris's house, and we sat down at his kitchen table with a notebook, and we drew up like 3 run plays and maybe 3 passing plays, something like that, for that coming week. And we went out, and I think we rushed for about 290 yards and won a football game. But it was a novelty. It was a novelty. That novelty, though, spread like wildfire. And by the time you get to 2010, and the NFL has now adopted spread principles. They were not willing to go 10 personnel. Very few teams were willing to ditch their tight end because the tight end was such an important piece in NFL offenses, and they really felt like they were going to get ganged up on in the box. And so instead they went 11 personnel, but it was a revolution of sorts. The vast majority of teams in the league were still 12 or 21 personnel teams. But by 2010, every single team in the NFL in the year 2010 ran a majority of their plays from 11 personnel. And by 2014, it was just the norm. Between 2014 and 2017, all 32 NFL teams ran a majority of their plays out of 11 personnel for those 4 straight years. It just was the preferred mode of attack for offenses. It allowed them to spread the field. It allowed them to take advantage of defenses that were still putting big linebackers on the field. If you think back to the Patriots, when they first launched their dynasty and they win their first couple of Super Bowls between 2001 and 2009 or so to speak, in that decade, their starting linebackers, Teddy Bruschi and Ted Johnson, both weighed around 250 pounds. They were big dudes. Inside linebackers were downhill run thumpers. And then the spread revolution hit, and offenses in the pros went 11 personnel, and suddenly the Teddy Bruschis of the world became dinosaurs because they were now being tasked with doing things that they weren't really built to do. Play the perimeter more, fit the run out in the D gap outside the tight end, run to the boundary to defend perimeter screens. So a new breed of linebacker came to town. The Fred Warner type linebacker who was lighter, faster, more athletic, had a new skill set. Yes, he could still fit the run in the A and B gaps, but he was much better equipped, being lighter and faster, to play out on the perimeter, to play the passing game, to blitz the quarterback. That linebacker revolution has overtaken the league, and now you see lots of guys. The prototypes are now the Matt Milanos and the Nick Boltons and the Fred Warners, and the guys like Brucey and Johnson are dinosaurs. So defenses have countered the offensive revolution. Well, what are offenses going to do? Well, we're already seeing it. I did a deep dive on this yesterday, writing an article for FFSN. And the article is about how offenses are going big again. It really kind of, again, I said 2014 to 2017, for those 4 years, every single team in the NFL ran more plays out of 11 personnel than any other grouping. And that was really the peak of a trend that began around 2010. And the league as a whole in 2023 ran 65% of its snaps from 11 personnel. So it's not like we're going to see 21 personnel become the norm tomorrow. But we are seeing certain teams choose to gravitate back to that bigger personnel. It really started with Baltimore in 2018. I'm sorry, with San Francisco in 2018. San Francisco in 2018 became the first team in 5 years to run more plays out of another personnel. It was 21 because they had the great fullback Kyle Juszczyk, and they used him as a Swiss Army knife, and they put him on the field a lot, and they became a 21 personnel team, and they were very good. And the next year, Minnesota and Philadelphia joined them. They didn't join them as 21 personnel teams. They joined them as 12 personnel teams. And they used a second tight end more frequently. And each year since then, one or two other teams has kind of joined this mini revolt. So that now Baltimore, Atlanta, Arthur Smith, the OC in Atlanta, he did it first in Tennessee, then as a head coach in Atlanta, and now he's brought it to Pittsburgh. He is a big 12 and even 13 personnel, 3 tight ends on the field coach. He put 3 tight ends on the field more than any other offense in the league last year in Pittsburgh. Obviously, the Tennessee Titans have done it. The Baltimore Ravens, my goodness, in 2023, under 2022, I should say, under offensive coordinator Greg Roman, the Ravens ran just 12% of their offensive plays out of 11 personnel. They were overwhelmingly 12, 21, and even 22. 22 personnel, 2 backs and 2 tight ends. A lot of big dudes on the field. That was Baltimore's number 1 personnel group in 2022. They ran more plays out of 22 personnel than they did out of any other. And they were second in the NFL in rushing. And it makes a lot of sense because let's say you're going up against the Buffalo Bills with a linebacker like Matt Milano, who weighs 223 pounds on the field, and a bunch of big safety types. Tremaine Edmonds was their linebacker. He's a little bigger, around 240 pounds, but a little bit more of an athlete than he is a downhill banger. Man, you load up with tight ends and fullbacks, and there's a pretty good chance you're going to be able to bully the Buffalo Bills in the run game, just as an example. And that was Baltimore's mindset. And Greg Roman was eventually fired because they didn't believe that he developed Lamar Jackson enough. But Todd Monken has come in, and he's remained a fairly big personnel coach. The Ravens are running 11 personnel more under Todd Monken, but they're still only around 30-some%, which is well below the league average. Baltimore has really zigged when so many other teams have zagged. And again, they're not alone. We've seen lots of teams do it. And again, why are they doing it? They're doing it because they feel that the bigger personnel gives them the opportunity to force defenses to either take some of the players off the field for which they are now built, right? Those specialists, those good nickel corners or third safeties that they've invested in. Maybe by doing so, you force them to put a bigger linebacker on the field who's not as good a football player as that slot guy. But there's another advantage. Surprisingly, the Minnesota Vikings used a decent amount of non-11 personnel under Kevin O'Connell. And I say surprisingly because you look at the weapons that they have at wide receiver and you say, well, aren't they going to spread the field? Well, think about this. If you're Minnesota and you go 2 tight ends, that means you got 7 guys in the box to block. So the defense has to put at least 7 in as well. And if they only put 7, every offensive line coach in America feels this way. If you get a hat on a hat, if the numbers are even, 6 on 6 in the box, 7 on 7 in the box, we should win that. The offense should win that. We should be able to win a scenario where there's a hat on a hat, and I also have a quarterback and a running back. I'm handing the ball to the running back, or the quarterback now has the option to pull it out and run an RPO or a read option. Even numbers benefits the offense in the run game. So Minnesota's got to feel like, hey, if they give us even numbers, 7 on 7, we're going to run the ball. But if they don't, that means they're dropping a safety. And that means they're going 1-on-1 outside. And if you are 1-on-1 on Justin Jefferson, you're going to lose that. And if they take that single high safety and they shade him to Justin Jefferson, well, we got Jordan Addison on the other side, and he's a pretty darn good wide receiver. So you can see from a matchup perspective why a team like Minnesota would love to go 12 personnel. Now, where will this go? Let's end with this. Where will this go? My suspicion is that because tight ends are so good these days, the new breed of tight end, the so-called move tight end, the tight end, you can move all about the formation. You can put his hand in the dirt. You can detach him. You can play him in the slot. Shoot, you can split him out wide. Brock Bowers is the prototype. Tyler Warren, Colston Loveland, guys like that. They're unbelievably valuable chess pieces because they allow you to do an awful lot of different things in your offense. But if you can pair one of those tight ends with a more inline guy, a bigger banger, a guy who can really put his hand down and block, and also is athletic enough to catch the ball in the flat and maybe run up the seam. Doesn't have to be an elite athlete like Brock Bowers, but he's a functional pass catcher. If you can do that in a 12 personnel offense and put 2 weapons on the outside, like look what the Dallas Cowboys have just done by acquiring George Pickens. You now have George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb on the outside. And if you can now put 2 functional tight ends, one who's a little bit more of an athlete and one who maybe is a little bit more of a blocker in the box, you've really created some problems for defenses, especially those who are built lighter as a result of so many offenses moving towards 11 personnel in the past decade. It is a fascinating scheme matchup, chess match. And right now, it's the offense's move. The offense moved, the defense countered. It's the offense's move again. And I really think that we're going to see more and more 12 personnel. I don't think it'll become the majority or the dominant grouping in football in 2025 or maybe even anytime soon. But I absolutely think you're going to see more and more teams continue to emphasize 12 personnel because the tight ends are getting so much better and because the scheme matchup right now is beneficial. All right, that is our show for Tuesday. Appreciate those of you who took this dive with me because I think it's fascinating. For those of you who are interested in this stuff, wonderful. For those of you who are not, we're moving the conversation on. Wayne Mazzoni on tomorrow. Great conversation about the psychology of coaching. How do you have to be a psychologist as much as a scheme guru, so to speak, State of the Franchise on Thursday. Rob Guerrero will be here to talk about the 49ers. Pez on Friday. Great week of shows. So until then, have a great day, everybody. I'll catch you tomorrow.